From the campaign trail,
I will secure our election,
to a sweeping executive order.
How simple does that sound? Proof of citizenship, voter ID, one-day voting and paper ballots.
President Trump plans to reshape federal elections with a voter ID requirement. Voters in Wisconsin passed a Republican-led effort to enshrine voter ID in the state's constitution, too. And in Congress, GOP reps, along with 4 Democrats, passed the SAVE Act, which would require proof of citizenship to vote in federal elections. A movement fueled in part by Donald Trump's 2020 election loss and the false claim that American elections have been tainted by widespread fraud. But in Kansas, voters are experiencing deja vu and warning the rest of the country of what could come. The state tried a proof of citizenship law over a decade ago, and for some, it was a fiasco.
Nobody at the time had asked me for any additional proof.
Tad Stricker is a U.S. citizen. In 2014, he moved to Kansas for work, prepared to start a family, and quickly registered to vote.
They just said, "Do you want to register to vote?" And I said, "Absolutely."
Months later on Election Day, he waited in line only to find out he wasn't registered and could only cast a provisional ballot. So you didn't get any phone calls, no letter in the mail saying, "Hey, this is what's going on. You are not on the rolls."
No, there was absolutely no communication.
Stricker was purged from the Kansas voter rolls, and his ballot never counted after a 2011 state law that mandated proof of citizenship for anyone registering to vote, meaning voters had to present documents like a passport or birth certificate.
It was humiliating. It was almost like I was being treated that I did something wrong, and I had no idea what was going on at the time.
The ACLU represented Stricker and other residents going up against Chris Kobach, then the Secretary of State, now a Trump ally. He was a household name as an architect of election security measures and the push to keep undocumented immigrants from voting. Those studies show they almost never do.
Not only was it almost unanimous among Republican legislators, more than 2/3 of Democrat legislators voted for our election security law.
A federal judge found 12.4% of eligible Kansans who tried to register between 2013 and 2015 were blocked, about 31,000 voters. Kobach's team says that 94% of those people ultimately proved their citizenship and got on the rolls, and says his team identified 44 non-citizens who had improperly registered, but most of them did not attempt to vote, and those incidents spanned several election cycles. Still, it sounds like a couple dozen people on one side.
44,
yeah, 44 people, several thousand, maybe tens of thousands of people who at minimum had to go through further hurdles in order to exercise their right to vote.
Tens of thousands of people who had to go
or potentially unable to participate in an election.
No, tens of thousands of people whose registration wasn't complete.
Is it your view, though, that it's okay to lose a certain number of legitimate voters in a cycle if it means you've made sure that absolutely no non-citizens even had the chance to attempt to vote?
I think it's incorrect to say that you've lost the opportunity for the U.S. citizens to vote. There are always requirements to vote. So you could say, well, any state that has any registration requirement is imposing a hurdle and is denying someone the opportunity to vote.
In 2018, a federal judge struck down the proof of citizenship law, declaring it unconstitutional. Today, Kobach is the Kansas Attorney General.
The problem is, this is like throwing out the baby with the bathwater.
Attorney Mark Johnson worked with many of the plaintiffs.
There were a significant number of people who were not being allowed to register to vote because they didn't have the piece of paper that the law required.
Did those numbers shock you at the time?
Stunning. Absolutely stunning.
A 2023 study found that nearly 10% of voting-age U.S. citizens, some 21 million people, cannot readily access proof of citizenship. About half of Americans don't have a passport. Some don't have copies of their documents, often lost or destroyed. What do you think the impact could look like at a national level?
Millions of people who should be allowed to vote will not be allowed to vote.
The Senate still needs to vote on the SAVE Act, its passage uncertain. But Trump's efforts are already getting legal pushback from Democratic attorneys general in 19 states filing suit. The White House telling NBC News in part, the Democrats continue to show their disdain for the Constitution. And it continues to show in their insane objections to the president's common sense executive actions to require proof of U.S. citizenship in an effort to protect the integrity of American elections. It did not respond to our questions about the Kansas law being struck down. Tad Stricker says he'll never miss out on an election again and warns that his experience is a cautionary tale.
If this can happen to me, it can happen to anyone.
If you're wondering what happens next, very likely it's lawsuits. And those could take a long time to wind all the way through the courts and end up potentially in front of the Supreme Court. Attorney Mark Johnson, who you met in that story there, is part of a network of attorneys that are ready to fight this out if it comes to that. They warn that while it may have been 30 or so thousand people in Kansas, multiply that across 50 states, and we're talking about millions of people's rights at risk here, Tom.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or follow us on social media.